Their meeting at 5:30. And, oh, it is definitely on. Thank you, AGP. I can hear it echoing. Thank you. And with that, I'm going to establish a quorum and ask the city clerk for a roll call.
Councilmember Barton has not joined us yet. Councilmember Edwards?
Here.
Councilmember Landrum?
Here.
Councilmember Ford?
Here.
And Mayor Wixom.
Here. We are going to forego our public comments. Excuse me. Let me take that back. We're going to forego our all of our updates from council and the flag salute and all that till our regular meeting at 5:30, and we're going to jump right in, and I will open public comment at this time for items on this agenda.
Any particular order, Madam Chair?
Item number 1. Item number 2. No particular order. Nobody's turned in speaker slips.
Good afternoon. Terry Simons, Morro Bay. If I can, I'll speak briefly to both issues. As I understand them, you have the roundabout issue or the intersection of 41 Highway 1, and then you have the realignment of the Ironman calendar. First of all, I want to compliment once again.
We don't have the roundabout, Terry. That's the intersections later. We have regional housing and infrastructure plan.
I'm sorry. You're right.
Okay,
that's
just
on
a
the
heads up for you. Sorry to interrupt.
Regional housing. Okay.
Sorry to
so regional
interrupt.
housing, and then the realignment of the calendar for Ironman. Once again, I want to compliment Chief Watkins for hearing the public and finding a path to help Morro Bay adjust to the impacts that we experienced during the first of 3 Ironman, and I much appreciate the rescheduling of the calendar. I think that's going to be a big plus. Moving on to the regional housing infrastructure plan, boy, it's a fat topic with amazing unintended consequences, in my opinion, and I really find it challenging that this is a simple read and file, because half of what you're asked to read and file isn't even in the report yet and is promised for later in the year. I would recommend that the council defer action on this until such time as the report is deemed complete with all the exhibits and attachments that are noted to be coming, some in July, so that you can really see the impacts. But from a fundamental point of view, I do not see how Morro Bay benefits from inclusion in what is fundamentally a county-driven project. Thank you.
Thank you, Terry. Anyone else?
Jeff Heller, good afternoon. I'd like to speak to item number 1, which is the HIP proposal, and I kind of agree with Terry a bit on this. What is the cost-benefit analysis to belonging to this group? Frankly, when I read aspirational document, it kind of sets me off, because I think, how many aspirational documents do we need? I look at our general plan as an aspirational document. What is the benefit of spending staff time and council time to participate in this group? What's the downside if we don't participate? We'll get the information that Scott needs for ARENA and keeping current with that. Will we get the information that we need? I'm not sure that it's something we need to belong to, but that's just my personal thought about it. Obviously, there are benefits to establishing relationships and working collaboratively with these agencies, but can we do that without belonging to a group that is going to spend a lot of time creating an aspirational document, which may or may not specifically apply to Morro Bay? Thank you, and thanks for showing up, doing your job. Appreciate it.
Good afternoon, Council. I'm Sean Green. I'm a member of the Harbor Advisory Board. And most of these comments are simply relayed from things that I've heard regarding item 2, Ironman here in Morro Bay. I haven't heard anything but support for the switch to Sunday. I have heard a couple suggestions for Friday, and as a former Ironman triathlete myself, I do think that there's merit in at least asking about Friday from an athlete's perspective. Friday is preferable to Sunday, and I think both are pretty equal in terms of tourism and city benefit. I've heard a recommendation to form a better citizen committee for planning purposes. I think that the planning for the race itself was a pretty small group, was my understanding. One suggestion to advertise more in target markets for non-athletes to alert people of road conditions, road closures, and the schedule for the weekend so that no one is surprised. Really strong praise for public safety at the event. Perhaps the next step then, according to what I've heard, is a focus on functionality in the city because we've already proven that we can accomplish the public safety aspect, which is great. Really strong volunteers from what I've heard. One of the bigger issues that I've heard from multiple people is the staging area at Market Plaza was somewhat problematic for some people in that it closed much of Embarcadero parking for a full week. So there were some alternative suggestions, perhaps at the Rock, perhaps at Tidelands, perhaps the Triangle or Dirt Lot, perhaps the Harbor Storage Lot, depending on the functional needs of that staging area. Regarding the race course, I know my understanding is that there was a last-minute change that caused some issues that were out of our control. I've heard suggestions, and I think pretty good ones, that the race during our negotiations ought to be kept entirely to the north or entirely to the south to allow whichever side of our town or our downtown that we don't use to be an access point for people that are not athletes that are trying to access our bay. Logistically, that would essentially mean that either Beach Street or Pacific or Marina is kept open because it's impractical and infeasible to cross over the race course. I think that's all. Yeah, I think those are all the comments. I just wanted to relay those to you for your deliberation and as you enter negotiations with an entity that is for profit. All right, so just keep that in mind. Thank you.
Hello, good afternoon. Nicole Dorfman. I pretty much agree with what the other folks have said about the housing proposal put forth, this regional compact. In reading through the document, what mostly concerns me is the fact that residents are completely omitted from the list of stakeholders. So essentially, our voices don't count in this contract. So I appreciate that you give us an opportunity to speak here and to count. So I would agree with what Mr. Simon said about deferring action right now. And if there's an opportunity to return and maybe redraft some of this, include residents as one of the stakeholder groups. Thank you.
Betty Winholtz. Speaking to item number one, I want to appreciate Mr. Green's comment that maybe we look at Friday and not just Sunday, that might actually be a more benefit to the people on the Embarcadero. Hadn't occurred to me. Appreciate that thinking. Most of my comment is with regard to item number one. I am not a top-down, centralized person. I believe in decentralization. I believe in the character of all our different communities in the county. You know, I have a particular picture of in my head when I think about Arroyo Grande or Paso Robles or Grover Beach or whatever. And I would hate to see us start to become generic looking, which I think is what's happening here. They've asked us to align, is the word they use, all our housing elements, that our money that we get through SLOCOG, whether it's for housing or for infrastructure, is going to be based on this document that you're asking you to pass today. Again, as noted, that isn't completed here for you tonight. I think the point about stakeholders is extremely important. Maybe you, as government officials, represent the public, but we are not acknowledged in this document at all. It's developers, it's chambers of commerce, it's Cal Poly, it's the REACH organization, but the public is not in here. And I think that's a critical comment and informative of where this might be coming from. I appreciate that a lot of work has been done, but a lot of the language is very catchphrases, you know, like accelerate housing, resilient infrastructure, regional conditions. But what does that have to say about Morro Bay? What does that have to say about Atascadero? In my comments to you, I noted who had prepared or worked on these plans, who are professional organizations, and not that they are good or bad. That's not my point. My point is for you to notice that these are seasonal economists, savvy analysts, people who aren't from here and may or may not know us, but are getting us to want to think regionally or as a group. I would hate for San Luis County to start looking like LA County, where all the little communities are connected and we look the same and we have no distinction. And I don't know that that was the intent here, but it's certainly by uniforming us and making our money dependent on that, it's suspicious to me. And I would say, having served on SLOCOG in the past, that there is already a great deal of interdependence in that organization itself, as well as the others, APCD, the RAC, all those things that we belong to, that I don't know that we don't already do what this document is saying. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Madam Mayor and council members, city staff, residents and friends. My name is Jeff Eccles. I'm a business owner in town and taxpayer and voter. And I also wear another hat that you should be aware of. I'm the CEO of the Housing Trust Fund for San Luis Obispo County. The Housing Trust Fund is a nonprofit affordable housing lender, and we fund affordable housing projects throughout the county. I sat in on the process of the HIP plan, the Housing Infrastructure Infrastructure Plan, as a member of the steering committee. So I'm intimately involved with how the plan came about. And I want to back up just for a second. The initial idea of the Regional Housing Infrastructure Plan was to coordinate activities amongst the 7 cities and the county, the different jurisdictions, so that we can most efficiently deploy dollars. What this is about is deploying dollars in the most efficient way, getting the biggest bang for our buck. There's nothing that's being asked of the council here in Morro Bay today specifically in terms of approval of plans or developments or anything like that. All it's saying is, hey, let's take the work that we've done up to this point in 2020 with our initial commitment to work on a regional basis, and then secondly, to involve a regional component in our housing element, the way the other 7 entities did, and continue to move forward in that way. An example of something that the city has done recently under Mr. Graham's leadership was work together with other jurisdictions to come up with standards off-the-shelf plans for ADUs, accessory dwelling units. That worked out really well. It actually is saving our citizens money and saving our city money because we were able to act collaboratively with other departments. I think it was three other departments. I understand the concern about a loss of autonomy for Morro Bay, or maybe losing our voice or our individuality. I don't see that as the case, however. Instead, I see the case as our voice being amplified because we have a seat at the table. And we have to remember that SLOCOG, at the end of the day, the Council of Governments, is the one that actually distributes the RHNA numbers, the Regional Housing Needs Allocation numbers, amongst the county. So we want to work with SLOCOG and our other jurisdictions on how those dollars are going to be spent so that we can get our biggest bang for the buck. So we're not giving up a voice here, we're gaining a voice, and I urge you to support the continued collaboration of the regional plan. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else for public comment on the special agenda? Seeing none, I will close public comment. AGP, is there anyone in the queue?
Thank you, Mayor Wixom. Dana Swanson currently has her hand raised. I'm going to unmute you, Dana.
Thank you for that. We needed our day enlightened. With that, I will close public comment and bring it back to council. This is going to be Mr. Graham's going to take this Community Development Director, Regional Housing and Infrastructure HIP review. Mr. Graham.
Thank you, Mayor Wixom. It's my pleasure to bring forward a presentation on the Regional Housing and Infrastructure Plan process, something the city's been involved with regionally related to addressing issues concerning housing in our county. It's been ongoing for several years and initially started off at the county and then later transferred over to SLOCOG, who is the lead on it now. And with that, we have some of the folks that are involved with the project here that'll provide the presentation. We have Sarah Sanders from SLOCOG sitting over here, Michael Foote with REACH, and then Carolyn Berg. REACH and Carolyn have been hired by SLOCOG to help with the process. Carolyn's going to provide us the presentation, so I'll ask her to come up to the mic, and then there'll be opportunities for questions later, and then certainly we have the whole team over there available to answer questions of the council once the presentation is completed. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, good. My mic's hot. Hi, Mayor Wixom and members of the council. I really appreciate you making time, and hello to all of the community members behind us and watching on the TV. I appreciate the opportunity to come and talk to you a little bit about the Regional Housing and Infrastructure Plan, and hopefully cover some of the concerns I heard today that have come up from community members on how did this plan come about and what is it truly asking for. And I don't know if our slides are...
Dana, can we get the presentation up?
But I'm Carolyn Berg with Coble Collaborative, and again, as Mr. Graham just pointed out, Ms. Sanders and Mr. Foote are here as well, so hopefully we can get to any questions after the presentation you may have. Today, I might use the term HIP because Regional Housing and Infrastructure Plan is a lot to say every time I want to talk about it. So as I talk about the HIP throughout, that's really the project I'm referring to. So today, what I'd like to cover is just to really briefly touch on the background for anyone that might not have been involved early on in the process, as Mr. Graham talked about and Mr. Eccles just noted. And then I will touch on the stakeholder engagement process that was taken throughout this initiative and talk you through what's included in the HIP, what are some of the key findings, and what does the future of the HIP look like for each of the communities in the region. And then Mr. Graham will close us out with the actual 2 recommended actions and any follow-up Q&A for you. Sorry. Okay, so the challenges of addressing housing and infrastructure, of course, take the actions of many, and we did want to start the whole presentation off acknowledging that this city and the other cities have done a lot along the way, and so we worked with your staff just to come up with a few highlights of great projects that you've already moved forward in the recent years, whether that's through the partnership with the Housing Authority to fully fund an affordable housing project here, creation of 35 low-income housing units in the region, or through your community development efforts, trying to streamline processes and come up with different initiatives that help to make the production of the housing your community wants a little smoother and easier. But, as I'm also sure you're aware, it's not on local government alone to be solving the issues that our region faces when it comes to housing and infrastructure. There's a lot of different players involved in this, from the state all the way to the local communities, and from private industry to public. And so that's where we, at the regional level, have seen the benefit of what can be possible when we work together. You heard a few examples from Mr. Eccles just now, but really, it doesn't make sense to do all of our planning together, but where does it make sense, and how could we achieve more in some of these areas when we're trying to address such big issues as housing and infrastructure? So in 2019, as Mr. Graham pointed out, the county, the 7 cities, SLOCOG, and various stakeholders came up with a new regional initiative to start looking at how could we address regional housing needs together. And this really, it was targeted in those 2 areas, but it quickly became pertinent that this actually helps with a lot of other issues that we're facing. How to attract good paying jobs if you don't have housing that can actually be affordable by local workforce? How do you have a strong economy if businesses can't afford the area? Addressing homelessness, and how do you support people's basic needs? So there's just a lot early on, recognizing that all of these problems start to overlap. So if we can make some progress on housing and infrastructure, it could alleviate some of the other issues as well. So since the beginning, this regional initiative has always been a phased approach. I've somehow lost the slide. It did it again. It's okay. Basically, there's a slide missing, so I'm going to go back here just not to be distracting. But essentially, in 2019, when the county launched this off, one of the first efforts was to create a more formal collaborative environment. So in early 2020, all 7 cities, the county and SLOCOG, unanimously approved a regional compact, which, as some community members spoke to today, really did set a vision. It doesn't make sense to do everything together, but where are some areas related to housing and infrastructure where we could support one another? The second goal was to look at aligning land use planning documents where it made sense. So in 2020, Mr. Graham and others helped to weigh in on each agency, how could they learn from each other or support and kind of reduce the cost of doing particular studies. And in the housing elements, there was one small chapter on regional policies where we could maybe support each other in pursuing grant funding and other similar initiatives. And the final goal of this regional initiative is to come up with a strategic action planning tool. And so that's the part we're going to talk about today. And I'm just going to highlight here because I'm not quite, yeah, this is right. So with the pandemic, this effort was put on hold. So it might feel like it was really far away when we did those past actions. Last year, the county asked SLOCOG to take over ownership of this final phase of the project because they're the regional planning agency. And so SLOCOG was asked to move forward with this, but at a pretty accelerated pace because the funding for the regional housing and infrastructure plan comes from State Senate Bill 2, which sunsets in September of 2023. So in essence, SLOCOG had about 6 months to develop this analytical tool. The point of it is to be a living document, something that can continue to be updated as cities update their community plans and updated as infrastructure burdens either arise or are solved along the way. And the main purpose of it is, like I said, it's a phased approach. Because of that short time frame, SLOCOG really focused first on inventorying infrastructure needs throughout the region, finding a way to prioritize among the many needs of the region, and then identifying possible funding opportunities. What could each community pursue to actually address its infrastructure needs moving forward? And so for the stakeholder engagement along the way, I'll say overarching to this, the SLOCOG board has been hearing about this plan since October 2022, and through that they've allowed public comment, albeit at a regional scale. And then in addition to that, we've had a very focused stakeholder engagement with some of the key players on who bring housing to the forefront. So we had the city managers and assistant city managers group engaged at several key milestones along the way. We had your community development staff through the housing action team. There's the building and development and construction group that were engaged to provide private sector thoughts on what their barriers have been and how we could help in that area. And then we have our housing advocacy group, so that included the Morro Bay Chamber of Commerce and other chambers, Home Builders Association, and our nonprofit builders. And then finally, of course, this summer, we're meeting with all of the elected officials and having the opportunity to hear from you and seek support for the overall planning initiative. And then the final group that Mr. Eccles noted being on is the HIP Steering Committee. And so that's a stakeholder group that was meant to help us see across all of those stakeholder groups, how do we integrate what we're hearing and really balance, I guess, all of the needs of these groups. And so we wanted to really briefly touch on the calendar of our outreach roadshow this summer. So we started with early June going to the SLOCOG board to present the draft HIP to them. At that time, they directed staff, including the consulting team with Reach and I, to go out and show this to all of the councils and seek feedback and support along the way. I want to note here that it's really important that you know there's no mandatory action in the HIP plan itself. It's creating, we're not asking you to adopt it, but rather support it. And it's really just creating new strategic planning tools that I'll walk through in a moment. After all the councils have heard it, it'll go to the SLOCOG board on August 2nd to be considered for adoption, and then after that, the county board will consider accepting it and moving it through to the grant funding agency at the state. So there's 7 major elements within the HIP. I won't talk through all of them because I'm sure you've had the chance to look through it. But the main ones I do want to focus on are the ones that are probably of greatest interest to you. So I'll talk about the infrastructure prioritization, the funding assessment that's being done, and then the affordable by design study and some of the key findings there. So with the infrastructure prioritization, SLOCOG focused its analysis on what could best accelerate housing in the region. First, they collected community land use data and infrastructure needs, and that's from city staff, from county staff, based on what's already planned and has been in front of councils. So it's only reflecting what is already planned by each community on their own. Then SLOCOG took those and analyzed housing efficient areas. So that was looking at basically of the areas each community plans to grow, which of those communities have capacity for water, wastewater, and transportation of a growing community. And then finally, what you see at the bottom is this really whittled down the list. So they went from having 440 infrastructure projects needed throughout the region and weighed it down to 80 HIP projects, I'll call them. So areas that are in housing efficient areas. And then SLOCOG looked at how to prioritize those, high, medium, or low, based on whether an infrastructure project was truly needed for housing. If so, what its cost benefit was. So how much is the funding gap for that particular infrastructure project versus how many new housing units are being benefited by that. And then finally, considering if there's any major barriers to development, like a moratorium that some communities have in place. And I'll note on this one too, there's other layers that can be added in the future with city and stakeholder input, such as a jobs layer and things like that. But as I mentioned, this with the speed of the project, we've just included what was known today, and everything else will go through public process in the future. The key findings coming out of the infrastructure prioritization is that overall, those 80 HIP projects represent over $1 billion in a funding gap need. So to get each community's projects built would take an additional $1 billion to close whatever funding gap they had for that project. And those, I think that's pretty impactful. When you look at each priority level here, they're representing about $300 million funding gaps. So if the region were to focus on, say, funding the high priority infrastructure needs at $348 million, that would help 54 infrastructure projects close their funding gaps and be able to move forward based on what we've heard from agencies. So essentially what SLOCOG's doing here is just funneling down, trying to understand which projects will best help the communities grow in the way that they've already identified. And there's a snapshot of some of the prioritized projects to give you a sense of those overall. Some of them are highway projects, some of them are more localized, like Morro Bay's water and wastewater improvement projects. All of those are on the priority list, and all of those then move forward into the future considerations. So the next major area is the funding assessment. What this essentially does is it looks at, SLOCOG brought on BKF Engineers consulting firm, and they're looking at the 80 HIP projects and essentially identifying what possible grant funding opportunities are out there that each community could pursue. So it's really just creating a toolkit of funding opportunities for your community and others to consider. And whether you do that on your own or partnering up with neighboring communities would be dependent on what the infrastructure project is that you're moving forward. The other thing that this funding assessment does, and the HIP overall, is I think it helps to tell the story of how your community's infrastructure needs fit into a bigger regional context when we're talking about solving housing and infrastructure challenges. And so that can help when you as the City of Morro Bay pursue certain grant funding opportunities. It can make it more competitive by showing how it relates to the bigger picture. And the final part of the HIP is a special affordable by design study. And so this was really brought about at the request of all of the cities and county community development staff, wanting to better understand and analyze where affordable by design housing, whether it's possible without deed restriction or finance assistance in the region, and if so, in what ways. So SLOCOG contracted Eco Northwest to do the study, And they engaged your staff as well as local developers and others to gain a sense of what our housing market looks like. And their findings were sobering, but not surprising. I think all of us have a sense that it's pretty unaffordable in the area at the moment. I will say the positive is they did find that in the current market, there are some affordable by design rental units throughout the region. Generally, they're more high density with lower amenities. But when they looked at the market for sale units, they didn't find any except for manufactured homes, and that's only if you didn't include the cost of the land that the homes sit on. So that really then led to the next question of, well, what could make things more affordable? And so in the short term, the consultant is coming up with a menu of policy options that could be looked at by the region and each community on their own. Really using what they've seen throughout the United States be used as different ways of creating more attainability of housing or affordability through policy levers. Again, like the funding, all this is doing is creating a toolkit. There's no mandatory action coming out of this. They're just putting together, here are some different policies we've seen used elsewhere that you might be able to consider here at Morro Bay or in other communities to the extent they make sense. And that takes us to the future phases of the HIP. So again, today is just one step in this larger regional collaborative initiative, and the intent overall is to create an adequate supply of housing, create more resilient infrastructure that supports that, and overall continue fostering an economically prosperous area, really dependent on each community and taking the actions it needs to, whatever that looks like. I want to be really clear that I heard this earlier, of course, each community is unique, and there is no one-size-fits-all when it comes to planning. So it's really just looking for where are the areas where we can support each other. And again, this is not including mandated action that you adopt certain policies or pursue certain funding opportunities, really just becoming a tool to help overall with our region, having a bigger voice as we try to pursue different opportunities. And again, it's just a living strategic planning tool to help focus our efforts as a region moving forward. And with that, I'm going to hand it back to Scott, I think, to close out with the recommended actions. And we're available for questions if you have any. Thank you.
Thank you for the presentation, Carolyn. So we have the recommended actions on the screen in front of you. There was one, to consider support of the regional housing and infrastructure plan, basically just to continue on, with the work that we're doing with it. There are future to-do things in the that are in the pipeline as it relates to the HIP. So additional efforts that'll be forthcoming potentially. And then the second item is to direct staff to return to council with discussion on ways to utilize and implement the regional housing infrastructure plan. And you might be thinking, what might that look like? And I think you heard Carolyn talk about the affordable by design, kind of toolkit that's being developed. That might be one thing that we bring back to have discussions about possible policy implementations in relation to something along those lines. I think with that, I'll end the presentation. Certainly, the team's available for questions. I'm here as well. Happy to answer any questions you might have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Graham, and thank you for the presentation. This is my third time seeing it. I do have a question. When in July do you expect the remainder of the information to be available?
So, yeah, we'll be having, I think everything goes out to the TAC meetings on the 14th of July. So, and that's the SLOCOG technical advisory committees.
Thank you. Questions to my right?
I'm curious about whether or not, and I guess maybe this is directed to Scott, but also to the council, whether the possible policy for consideration having to do with streamlining development review and permitting might be something that we would want to add to our basket of possibilities.
That is certainly already part of your goals. This plan and continuing with it is also part of your goals. I failed to mention that, but it is part of your current goals as well. So those will be things that we are working on. that aren't necessarily related to this, although it could be, I mean, strategies could come out of this, looking at what other jurisdictions are doing to streamline permitting processes and those types of things. Affordable by Design could come up with things that make suggested improvements to our processing, our permit process, sorry. So there certainly could be things that come out of that, yes.
Things that we perhaps haven't thought of, but the larger group does, or?
That's probably the best part about looking at things in a regional manner. You kind of get to sample what others are doing, and sometimes you can come up with things that might work for Morro Bay or can be tweaked to work for us, right? So.
Yeah. Thank you.
Scott, I'm just wondering what kind of time do you feel you're going to be expending out on this? Is it something doable? You feel that it's?
To this point, I mean, we've been engaged with this for multiple years, and the time expenditures from a staff standpoint hasn't been that much. I think you heard Carolyn referred to the Housing Action Team. This is one of the things. That's a regional effort regional group that meets monthly. We have planning staff on that group. They talk about all things related to housing, not just the HIP, but that was one of the things. And so some work was done there. Nancy Hubbard, our contract planner, sits on that committee. So I don't foresee there being a large, time investment really moving forward, other than if we bring something back to you, then we'll be putting together a staff report and recommendations and things like that.
Seems like we could potentially get a lot of information out of this and be collaborative with our regional partners. It sounds positive.
That's my take largely for the effort. I think Carolyn did a great job, kind of hitting the nail on the head with that, in that you can't do everything regionally, right? But things that we are all working on and we're all struggling with, housing being one of them, it doesn't hurt to kind of get together in a room and like, hey, what are the issues that you're having and those types of things. And I think that this was largely, started in that vein, so.
Thank you. Councilmember Barton, did you have any more questions?
No.
Councilmember Landrum?
Hi. So I'm new here, so I'm trying to understand this. I enjoyed reading all the information on this. I would like to know, well, first of all, besides Mr. Eccles, who represents Morro Bay in the HIP steering committee?
On me. I'll cover who's on it, and then we can see. There's city representation across all of those different groups for the most part, with Mr. Graham and Ms. Hubbard on the Housing Action Team, your city manager and assistant city manager on the regional managers group. Aha, here's the whole list. On the actual, that one stakeholder group for the HIP steering committee, it included city manager Matt Bronson from Grover Beach. That was by a decision of the city managers group collectively to appoint him. Mayor Heather Moreno from Atascadero, Councilmember Pease from City of Slow, Trevor Keith, County Planning Department, Aaron Abbott with Abbott and Reed, Lenny Grant, an architect with RRM, Jeff Eccles with Housing Trust Fund, Courtney Howard representing regional water planning, often working with your agency, and then Anthony Palazzo, Cal Poly, and George Aguilar at Wallace Group, so a local contract engineering firm. So I think other than Jeff Eccles, that sounds like about it, but across the other stakeholder groups, there's more representation.
Thank you. I was wondering so I'm trying to understand how it works. Has Morro Bay, to participate in this, has this cost Morro Bay money?
No. So the county got the SB2 funding, and we were asked to take it over last October. And all of the Housing Action Team, so the planners that are from all of the jurisdictions, wanted this affordable by design study. So we made sure it was funded through this plan. So
that's like the $75 per real estate transaction? Is that the SB2 that you're talking about?
No, I don't think so. It's a grant. Maybe it is. Is it the 72? I'm not sure where the SB2 comes from. Oh, okay. So it is based on that revenue source statewide.
From from real estate transactions?
That sounds correct, but I would have to go look it back up to confirm.
Okay, so is it all real estate transactions that take place in Morro Bay? Is that what our percentage is, or how?
So each jurisdiction got a percentage of funding with SB2 back in, 2019? Yeah. And so like Morro Bay got some, the county got some, so this is the county's portion. So this HIP plan was all funded by the county's portion.
Well, I looked up SB2, and it's based on real estate transactions, and up to, it's $75 per paper filed, up to $225. And I'm just trying to understand, is the amount of money that Morro Bay is eligible for within this representative of the transactions that take place in Morro Bay?
I would say separate from this effort, Morro Bay received SB2 funding for other housing element implementation items that we're still working on rapidly because it's ending in September.
Yeah.
And we're trying to close out affordable, the objective design standards that's been in front of the Planning Commission recently, and we're trying to get back in front of the Planning Commission to finalize before that, grant runs out. But so we have separate, SB2 funding for city things that we applied for city housing element implementation that doesn't have anything to do with this. Like Sarah said, the money that was used for this effort was SB2 funding that was allocated to the county. So,
okay.
Yeah, so completely separate from the SB2 funding that the city that was received for its
those
housing element.
Yeah, okay. Okay, and then, so how much money is in this fund from the state? Do we know that?
No idea.
No? I mean, for our part, in our county.
We received our full allocation of SB2 funding.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
And
the housing element implementation. Yeah, the number I don't know off the top of my head. We had multiple grant funds that came in at one time from different sources. We had REACH and LEAP grants as well. And we combined efforts on doing housing element implementation. So.
Well, I meant for the HIP, for what they're talking about. Oh, you don't know?
No, we didn't. None of the
Oh.
city's SB2 funding went towards the plan.
Okay, I thought you were
the county's
trying to.
allocation.
Oh, okay. I thought the whole thing was we're trying to decide what to do with it before it's.
No.
Oh.
I mean the grant runs out. It stops in September, so we can't bill against it past that.
Yeah, so my staff time or consultant staff time, we couldn't bill past September. So that's why this has moved at such an accelerated pace.
Oh, okay. And I mean, I know this sounds kind of personal, but what's the cost to generate these kinds of reports? I'm just curious, like,
Yeah.
I mean, I look at Econ Northwest and BKF Engineers, and they're like really big firms that aren't located in this area. One of them, I think, is out of state, and I just wonder why we aren't enriching our own community, our regional community in these kinds of things, and and how much money is going towards these outside, people.
Okay, so going to the consultant teams, we did a RFP process, so we actually went out to see who actually does this work, because honestly, this plan, no one's done this before. This is the first time that I know of. I couldn't find anything like it, so that's why it's kind of challenging. We're all kind of stumbling through it. And so an affordable by design study, I couldn't find any of that, and we just kind of created that. So we created a scope, working with the Housing Action Team. We sent that out. We got 5 proposals, and we had part of the Housing Action Team, which are the planners, interview these consultants. And so that contract was $50,000. And then the BKF Engineering, I think, is like $46,000, and that was also through an RFP process.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
And then I was really curious about the need for the RTA's proposed cashless fare system conversion, and why there is a need for this multi-jurisdictional project?
Yeah, so our board asked for a little more comprehensive inclusion of the transit system. And so we talked with the transit providers to see what would make it a little more accessible for more development. And so the whole purpose of the HIP is to focus on housing because the grant funding is for housing. So that's why we kind of use that as a lens. And so that was a project that was identified by RTA as something that they're looking into. And so that's why it was included.
But it's a top priority project, right?
Yeah, yes, because it benefits the entire county. So you're using all of the housing units in the entire county.
To have a cashless transit system, it benefits?
Fare system, so it's $500,000. So it's a lower cost project, and it benefits a lot more housing, not just in one community. So it's not only in
free.
Morro Bay.
Are you saying it's free, the transit?
Well,
It's free? It's free to riders to?
No, they would be converting the buses to a cashless fare system as opposed to using coins. You have to have exact change. So you would go at the kiosk and get if you've ridden transit and a few other places, I was just in Dublin, and so you go and put your cash on a card, and then you use a tap system essentially, or you can use an app. So this definitely needs to be fleshed out more. It's something that RTA has identified as a project they would like to consider, but there's a lot more. Their board needs to consider it and all of that. So
Yeah, do they have a problem with theft or something? Is that the high priority need for that?
No, it became a high priority because of, we really used how many homes, new additional homes, is it helping, and what's the cost? And because it's $500,000 projected, it just did well in the Excel sheet, like the analysis.
Okay. And I don't know who to ask this question to, but so this is a really new organization and way of doing planning, and there have been instances, and there are economically successful areas now. How did that ever happen without this regional planning? How is? Do you know what I'm saying?
It's a difficult question to
I'm just
answer.
wondering what what is the benefit for Morro Bay for this?
It's accumulating resources in one area in the form of the plan. Again, this isn't obligating the city to do anything. It simply, takes a look at some of the issues related to housing that were out there. It got everybody together to talk about, basically everybody in a room to talk about the issues they were experiencing, to see if there was things that we might do that would be helpful to all the jurisdictions in the county. I think it was a valuable, exercise, and one of the reasons we started off with the compact, we moved into working on the HIP. We included this component in the city's housing element, as did the other jurisdictions in the county, because it was felt that this was, worthwhile. So, and again, out of it, at some point, we'd be, depending on what the council does this evening, coming back, to look at opportunities to improve, maybe permit processing or to streamline housing, permitting, that type of thing in the city. So I think it's a valuable thing.
Council, I would add that one of the things that we heard loud and clear from the Chamber's listening tour was our businesses really support housing, not just in Morro Bay, but throughout the county. So if this plan encourages housing development elsewhere in the county, I think we still benefit from that.
That was probably one of the biggest single issues for our business owners in town is employees and not having places for their employees to live in town. So,
If I may make a comment, I think it's, permit and processing has been an issue, and it's something that we have, moved forward in the goal process, and something that we're still looking at and working on. And if there's any way that the information that we can get while collaborating with others in order to learn more, it seems like a positive venture to me.
I'm just trying to get information on this, and I wonder if the communities, the 7 communities prior to 2017, were they not communicating? Was there no collaboration within the county and the cities?
I've been in the county for, do I want to say, for about 27 years, and I would say we largely operated in silos for most of that time. We only engaged with the communities that were adjacent to us when we were forced to. I don't think the different jurisdictions found a lot of utility in it. We do a lot of collaborative planning now. We are much more focused regionally, at least, in our county, and we get together and meet regularly as it relates to things that are going on. The city managers group meets monthly. Community development directors in the county meet quarterly. That didn't used to happen.
Right.
So I think it's just, it keeps us apprised of what's going on. It allows us to be, I think, more flexible in how we address things, more nimble, if you will, when you see what, issues that other communities are experiencing and maybe how they're addressing those. Oftentimes what you find is we don't want to do it that way. You see, you get an effort when one of the communities is trying to address some sort of emergency situation or whatever it might be, and you learn from it. And the best way to do that is to be in a room, being able to talk with them. So I think this is kind of right along those lines, and I think this has, been the trend in the county now for probably the last, 10 or so years.
To meet and stuff, but this is independent of this plan.
This is I think this is a similar effort that aligns with what's been happening in the county to this point. It also kind of, came on the heels of we were meeting, all of the housing elements were due at the same time in the county as well. And so there was a lot of, discussion happening around those efforts as well. I think it probably led out of that as well, so.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Ford?
I only have one question. Just listening to our community, because all my other questions have been answered. Thank you, Council. But my question is regarding the concern for residents to have an input in this. And I heard that they did have a chance at the regional meetings to provide input. And I'm just wondering, moving forward, let's say we move forward with this today and this and HIP continues on for years and decades possibly, how can we ensure trust in our residents that their thoughts and their concerns are given thought essentially by the creators of this plan and in the future?
I always understand communities' concern about, that they weren't engaged on whatever it is we're doing, or they feel they weren't engaged. I think, the plan isn't doing anything in the city right now, right? I mean, that's later, right? That's the second, recommended item is, first one is just kind of to continue on down the road so we can get some of the rest of the tools, because as you heard, and they're not all done yet. And then as we, use the tools that come out of this effort, then that's when we sit down and engage the community on what we want to do moving forward. What is the desire of the community to foster and facilitate housing? What is the appetite for that? What does that look like? And I don't think we know yet. I just think this is information. So this is information that feeds into that effort. It's information we wouldn't otherwise have. It's not that we couldn't do this. I mean, we could do something similar and go look at policy improvements and those types of things. But it's nice to have good information to back it up. Certainly, I think that part of what's coming out of this is very valuable. So.
And so, if I'm understanding this correctly, different ways of input could. The input that you've received over time, you brought with you to these meetings as one of those, one of the members who helped on this board, as well as in the future, if we were to take recommendations or input or guidance from this plan and to implement it into our own city, when those plans are being created and those projects come forward, then our citizens would have a chance to then weigh in on those specific projects.
Yes, and this entire effort aligns with previous efforts that the city's done, big efforts, right? City's housing element being one, city's general plan update being two. I mean, there was a lot of citizen engagement through those processes, and there is a lot of several implementation items in those documents that align with this, and align with what this might look like in the future. So certainly, in those instances, we received a lot of community input, and when we move forward to do anything specific, when we create policy, that we'll have that opportunity as well. And whether that's funneled through Planning Commission to City Council or just goes to City Council, I mean, we'll see.
Okay, that's it for questions for me. Thank you, Scott.
Thank you. Councilmember Edwards?
I just have one more. Is it pretty much safe to say that this is a tool for us to measure things, projects that we're looking at, especially when it comes to housing, but it's a tool in our toolkit that doesn't necessarily mean we're making a decision based on it?
I think that's a good way to put it, and I think you might have maybe picked up on that from Ms. Sanders when she was up here speaking, that no one had done this before. Like we got together in a room and we were talking about like what would help us out, on the housing side of things, and what might that look like. And the affordable by design thing has been a big conversation, in housing circles for many years, and not a surprise that's coming out of it. That is something that could help us out in the future. So, and that is exactly what it is. It'll be a bunch of opportunities that you could implement potentially that might streamline or facilitate housing to move forward, and you have to see what fits for Morro Bay, right? And what doesn't. So. Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah.
So with for instance, the cashless fare system thing, if that's a high priority in all 7 cities, how does that work if each city can decide on their own? It seems like if some cities didn't want to do it, the whole concept wouldn't work.
Well, it's RTA, so it's a regional transit folks. So if it would happen regionally that way. So Morro Bay, it wouldn't relate to our transit system specifically. That's just in Morro Bay. It would be the regional transit.
So really, you only have a say in certain things, in certain aspects of it.
I'll take help from a friend. Thank
you.
It's a really good question. Similar to other cities wouldn't be able to turn to your city and tell you what to do or define your land use authority and how you choose to use it. I think similarly, your regional transit authority has certain autonomy, or I guess I shouldn't say autonomy, but authority and responsibility to create systems that accomplish what they're supposed to do. So they're one of the agencies that was asked what projects to bring forward, as Ms. Sanders noted. So in that way, they have to go through the public processes that they have to go through. They have to go have their board meetings and different public process to vet that project before it goes through. And in that way, cities, like they do with other transit projects, will have an opportunity to speak up, and so would individual residents throughout our 285,000 residents that might stand to benefit. But I would say that might be a good comparison for you. It doesn't necessarily mean that cashless fare project would go forward. It just starts to identify funding opportunities if that agency gets through all of the checkboxes of, public process and permitting requirements and getting the rest of its funding in order, if that's, yeah. So I would say it's similar. Just keeping that in mind of similar to no one stepping on your toes and telling you what to do. It's similar to the other agencies. They have to do whatever process they still have to do to meet all legal requirements and make sure their residents and constituents are engaged.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. So, Mr. Graham, you said it does not obligate the city until.
Well, I think the one item that we're asking for there is that you direct staff to come back when the tools are done, and so we can have a conversation about other things that we want to implement that might come out of the final results of the plan. So, housing is one of your goals already, so it seemed to align with that. And so that seemed like a pretty innocuous thing to request out of council, given that housing is already one of our goals. Probably be good at some point to report back on what we're doing, and this could be something that goes along with that. That was kind of the thought from a staff standpoint.
Thank you for that. Can I ask mine first? Thanks.
Well, no, whatever.
Thanks. I think what I'm hearing, the concern and my concern, and I'm hearing it from the residents and other council members, and thank you for the question, Councilmember Ford, because that was mine also, is the concern about taking away local input and local control and approaching regionally. I think in San Luis Obispo County, we're all fortunate in each one of our communities that are unique. Morro Bay is unique in different coastal situations, but I'm sure that, Pismo and Grover Beach and those in the coastal area share many of those same concerns and challenges we do. But I'm hoping that as this study continues on, that those are things that are added in, and I would think that those would be things I would hear from the other communities that find their communities unique and wanting to ensure that they have some greater local voices in this, and the stakeholders that were there, I think, concern some of us that there weren't more local residential voices participating, and that it comes back to where the feeling is that it's developer driven or those type of organizations. So circling back to make sure that we're inclusive to our community, I think is really important. You have a question, Councilmember?
Well, I just wonder about isn't it a bit premature to ask us to decide on this if the information from those two companies isn't in yet? And should we maybe wait until July?
Well, I guess I would say this. What is the concern by moving it forward? It's not obligating us to do anything. It's just obligating us to stay, I guess, engaged. Really, it's seat at the table versus not having a seat at the table, right? We've been working collaboratively, with the other entities in the county for multiple years. There's value in it, I think, and continuing to do so. I think there remains value in it, and it's minimal staff effort. It really isn't a whole lot of time, spent by us. We attend a couple of meetings and provide our input there. If they want particular information, it might, maybe we're putting an hour or two in, to go do a little bit of research for it, but that's about it. And that's not what's going to be coming back forward. That's all things that are now being handled on the consultant side of things that are just deliverables. So it's not even really, the city doing anything until those deliverables come out, and then I would imagine they'll ask everybody to review them, provide comment, and then finalize them, so.
Do you know when we would get the feedback from that?
I guess I would.
I said July 14th.
Well,
yeah.
When we would actually get it, brought to, for us.
I would assume it would be after the SLOCOG reviews it, which we have a seat on, along with the other communities. I agree with you. I think my apprehension only at this point is that we're asked to support a plan that we haven't yet seen come to fruition, and that's a little challenging, I think, for all of us.
Right.
Wanting to support working regionally and wanting to support these housing opportunities, yet we're being asked to do this without seeing everything that's there. And I guess at that, we could certainly withdraw our support if we felt there was something that was not in the best interest of our community, but it, to me, isn't necessarily the best way that we should be approaching this. So I'm a little disappointed that we don't have the remainder of the information as we're being asked to do this.
It'd be great. It literally is just, we had the grant, deadlines for this when we were in the middle of this, COVID hit. And as you're likely well aware, a lot of things got shelved for a year plus during those efforts. And so that's kind of where we find ourselves now in this process, I think, is, we're running out of time. We want to make use of the funds that were provided, and we want to make good use of those. And they wanted to be able to come forward and show the jurisdictions what they've come up with to this point. Like, this is what we've been working on. This is what this regional collaborative effort has been. And there's more to come. I think those are all good. Again, since it doesn't really commit the city to do anything other than just to kind of really stay engaged, at this point it seems reasonable. And Mayor, I agree. I think that at some point you don't want to play in the sandbox with everybody anymore. You don't have to. I mean, you're not being forced to, so.
Thank you. And I would assure the community that as a representative for this council and this city at SLOCOG, that if there's something along the way that the community is not comfortable with, I'm going to represent that voice and sway my other members if need be. But I think that, that we have those other opportunities, and I truly believe that as this is your first step on the group tour, that you will hear from other communities really pushing that we want to make sure local residential involvement is included. So with that, we're looking for a recommendation to discuss and consider regional housing plan, recommit 2020 San Luis County-wide regional compact, and direct staff to return with the discussion. I would also ask probably that our planning commission has an opportunity. I kind of had hoped maybe it would have gone to them first rather than us. Seems like it might have been a little more appropriate for them to vet through this and have an opportunity to look at it. And I know they are with the affordable by design and those other elements, but so much of this includes what they're doing right now for us. So I guess this is just, so do we just need recommendation.
So that's the recommendation of those two, the two actions was to consider support for regional housing infrastructure plan as a recommitment to the 2020 regional compact, and then 2, direct staff to return to council with discussion on ways to utilize and implement the regional housing and infrastructure plan. That'll be after things are complete, and definitely if we're looking at policy things that touch on things the planning commission would normally weigh in on, we will go there first. Happy to do that.
Thank you. And are we needing a vote on that? Or are we just recommending to staff?
So staff's asked for staff to be directed to return with the discussion. So based on that recommendation, I'd suggest there be a vote unless Director Graham believes that that direction's already been provided and we're midway through.
I'd like I'd prefer an affirmative action for both items, if you don't mind. So we could do that. That'd be great.
Okay, so I'll take a motion.
All right, I'll go for it. I want a seat at the table regionally, so I'm for this. I move that we support the regional housing and infrastructure plan as, let's see here, the 2020 San Luis Obispo County Regional Compact. Recommitment to the 2020 San Luis Obispo Countywide Regional Compact. And then also to direct staff to return with a discussion on ways to utilize and implement the regional housing and infrastructure plan.
That's good.
Okay.
Thank you.
And a second, please.
I second.
Thank you. And tonight will be voice voting. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
No.
Thank you for your presentation. Appreciate that. And with that, we'll move on to item 2, and we are turning that over to Chief Watkins. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Council. The agenda item that's being brought to Council is a recommendation to consider a date change from a Saturday event to a Sunday event for the final 2 years of the Ironman 70.3 contract with the City of Morro Bay. As mentioned in previous council meetings, this past event, Ironman 70.3, was our inaugural event, bringing thousands of athletes and spectators to the city. The event was safe and successful. City staff and city supporters expected to and did learn a good deal about what we could do to increase efficiency, communication, and integration with this event into our community for both residents and business owners. The day of the week, Saturday, was set based on the initial plan of Ironman to use Tidelands parking lot boat launch ramp for the transition area of the event. Saturday was selected as to not impact the launch ramp for more than 1 day during a weekend. As the planning continued and the transition area was changed to the Rock parking lot, the day was not changed. Post-event communication between business owners, Morro Bay Chamber of Commerce, Visit Morro Bay, and city staff has remained high to identify areas of concern or improvements that can be made prior to the next year's event. So why are we bringing this forward today when the Ironman 70.3 Morro Bay isn't scheduled until May of 2024? Well, the answer is the registration for the Ironman 70.3 will post for athletes to sign up for the event this month. They do it almost a year in advance. The athlete participation was high for this inaugural event. Ironman staff, city staff, and supporters anticipate hundreds of returning athletes, as well as first-time racers who are excited to join Ironman 70.3 Morro Bay after hearing the positive reviews from athletes about the first race. As stated in the staff report, we saw a large impact on the Embarcadero, with about 50% of the businesses seeing an increase in overall business because of the event. The other 50% of the businesses saw fewer customers and less business because of road closures. The shortened run course created an opportunity for spectators to see their athletes more than initially anticipated. One of the recommendations we have received, and I just want to say thank you to Chamber of Commerce, Erica Crawford, Lindsay Hansen, as well as Visit Morro Bay, Michael Womble, who's here with us this evening. We received recommendations to discuss and consider moving the event to a Sunday rather than a Saturday as a more strategic approach to how to integrate this event, and the businesses can maximize visitor impact while not closing the Embarcadero on a Saturday, which is our busiest day on the Embarcadero. So with that, I'll pass it to Mr. Womble from Visit Morro Bay on some additional information on the financial impact.
Thank you, Chief. You did actually a great job with that. A couple notes on this. Looking at some of our STAR data or Smith Travel Research on the lodging segment. This week, in comparison, going back 4 years to 2018, was the third largest impact for us during this time. Last year, 2022, was the biggest year of travel for Morro Bay and really for the coastal region of California. We were seeing a slight decrease in travel earlier this year, and this did show a positive impact for us. When we look at this in comparison to the rest of the county as well, in the STAR impact, we were the second highest in rated RevPAR, which is rev per available room. So our economic impact was the largest during that week in comparison to everybody else. City of San Luis also showed a positive impact, and I think there is some spillover from Ironman on that. We are waiting on the full scope of our TOT data to have a look at what that looks like. As Chief Watkins mentioned, I believe our opportunity here moving from a Saturday to Sunday as Morro Bay is one of, if not the top cross-visited destinations within San Luis Obispo County. So those staying in Paso Robles, Pismo Beach even, San Luis Obispo, elsewhere, coming to us for a day trip to come see the Rock, come experience the beautiful Morro Bay, eat at our restaurants and shop at our shops. I believe the Saturday had a big impact for that. The event being on Saturday was a huge impact for that cross-visitation. Moving it to Sunday would maximize that Saturday during that time frame. Also, we do have Tim from Ironman on the Zoom call as well to answer any questions. And seeing this, the ability to move this to Sunday also with our hotel space, or hotels or lodging, our travel was a bit inverted, and sometimes we see Friday is a little bit softer than Saturday. Friday was our big day. Saturday was slightly slower than Friday. Moving the race to Sunday would allow the athletes and then also travelers coming to stay Friday, Saturday, and depart Sunday. We were hearing stories of hotels and athletes leaving on that Saturday. This would carry them over through a full weekend for us. So hopefully that answers some questions, and we're here to fill in any gaps as well. Thank you, Mayor and City Council.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. And just for general reference, we are visiting this item at our August meeting. Tonight is just about changing the date or not. And we'll have the rest of the update and information in August, correct?
That is correct.
Okay, so we can go into more detail then.
That is correct.
So regarding this item for date change questions, Councilmember Barton?
No questions. I'm just intrigued that lots of other places that have Ironman have it on Sunday, so it seems like this is not an unusual.
That is correct. This is not unusual, and we were, being a working fishing harbor and being open fishing season during that May period, we didn't want to impact our fisher folk as much as possible during that Saturday and limiting having that weekend open as much as possible for them to enjoy the water in the open fishing season originally.
Councilmember Landrum?
I guess I'll just ask because it came up tonight in public comment a few times. Was the Friday day ever considered?
Not considered. Tim, I think Tim's on who's controlling. Tim from Ironman might be able to speak a little bit more to that. That is a little bit new for us.
Yeah, thank you for the question. Thank you, Mayor and Council, for having Tom and I from the Ironman group here. Friday events are pretty unique in my 12 years with the Ironman group. The only time we've had a Friday event was a World Championship event where they also hosted a race on Sunday. So generally speaking, you know, the town that hosts our events, they want to highlight their area. They want people to come, stay, enjoy what the host city has to offer. Unfortunately, on a Friday event, we just see very limited athlete participants showing up. These are everyday people, you know, teachers, military, lawyers. It's hard to take PTO to come down for multiple days. Overall, it would be in everybody's best interest for an event over the weekend versus a Friday.
Thank you.
Questions? No more questions. At that, thank you. I'm just going to share as a merchant. Hi, guys. As a merchant in Morro Bay and resident both, understanding the concerns that the businesses have, I watched the hotels and the people leaving and the impact that it had, and I know a lot of it, I think the concern right now is about access, and hopefully that's something that we're going to be addressing at the next meeting is about access, not just for the businesses, but for the residents. That seems to be the kind of gist of it all, and hopefully by moving the day over, I hope can help eliminate some of that challenge for the weekend traffic and visitors who want to get into town that I heard really couldn't, that had some challenges getting to hotels and things. My only concern would be about the residential impact on a Sunday and their opportunity and ability for faith-based organizations to get to and from one side of town to the other. So I think it's really important that we make sure that we address that. And also there was some concerns at the last council meeting, and again, I think those will be addressed hopefully at our next meeting about the harbor marine life during the swim that you heard a speaker at last meeting. So those are things we can talk about then. Any comments or anything for moving the date, or are we ready for a motion? Any discussion?
I just want to thank you, Mr. Wumboldt, for coming here tonight, and to Chief Watkins for your report as well. I think that this was our baseline, right? And we can only take the information that we got from year one, even though it was an incredibly successful event. There, of course, are always ways to improve, and so I appreciate you coming to us with this suggestion. I think it seems like a solution, and I hope that it is, and so I'll be supporting it. And I can go ahead and make a motion again if you like, or if someone else wants to.
Okay.
Laurel?
Yeah, I'll go ahead.
Laurel.
So I'm going to make a motion that the city council authorize the city manager and city attorney to execute the contract amendment with Ironman of the current dates of Ironman 70.3 Morro Bay from Saturday, May 18th, 2024 to Sunday, May 19th, 2024, and from Saturday, May 17th, 2025 to Sunday, May 18th, 2025.
Thank you. With that, I'll ask for a second.
I'll second it.
Thank you. Voice vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Appreciate
Mayor
it,
and
Michael.
Council. Have a good
Thank you, Chief. And with that, we will be adjourned until 5:30 when we will continue our meeting. Thank you.